Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles, this time sponsored once again by NordVPN. Once again, and for a limited time only, you can get 70% off a 3-year subscription plan when you go to nordvpn.com/jingles, and if you use the bonus code JINGLES you get an extra month for free. This special offer basically makes your subscription $3.49 a month, so you can browse and shop securely online on all of your devices. Now, I am of course aware, as I'm sure most of us are, that Nord have been in the news recently. Last year, Nord suffered a security breach. Now, that term security breach tends to be the kind of thing that sets off all kinds of alarm bells in people's heads, and nobody's attempting to say that Nord did not suffer a security breach, but, well, there's a security breach and then there's a security breach. Let me give you an example from personal experience. When I was in the Navy, when I was a radio operator, in the communications office, there are all kinds of extremely secret cryptological codes which are kept inside a secure compartment, the communications office, and locked away inside safes inside that secure compartment. Well, one day when I was duty radio operator, and it was my responsibility to be the last person out of the office at the end of the day, ensure that the office was secure, all of the safes were locked, anything that should be switched off was switched off, and as the last person out, also lock the door to the office behind me. I did almost all of that, but I forgot to lock the door of the office behind me. This was discovered by the officer of the day when he was doing his security rounds. I was summoned to the office, given an extreme bollocking, and then we had to go through the security breach procedure, which involved unlocking and opening all of the safes. Nobody was arguing that the safes had been broken into, but because a security breach had taken place, because the door was found to be unlocked, we had to go into the office, unlock all of the safes, get the muster lists, which are basically lists of what's supposed to be in that safe, and then check that everything that was supposed to be in the safes was still in the safes. This took hours. Nothing had been taken. Nobody really believed that anything had been taken, because in order for anything to be taken, first somebody would have to get over the gangway of the ship, which means they would have to get past the armed quartermaster and boatswain's mate. Then, yes, they'd be able to walk into the communications office, but then they'd also have to crack the safes. Nobody really believed that that had happened, and in fact by the time we'd finished mustering the contents of all the safes, we'd proven that that hadn't happened, but it's still a security breach. Something might have happened, regardless of how unlikely, and so investigation procedures had to be conducted. And that's kind of what happened with Nord. Nobody's suggesting for a second that they didn't suffer a security breach. They did. One of the third-party servers that they rented got hacked last year. But even though no user information was exposed, you have to treat it as a security breach. It is a security breach. You have to make sure that no user information was exposed, and then you have to look at why it happened and take steps to fix it. And they have taken steps to fix it. I mean, the first reason why it happened was because Nord don't own the servers. Most VPN services don't actually own the servers that they operate. They're all hired from third-party private data centers. Well, that's changing for a start, because Nord is moving to 100% owned servers, so they can physically control what happens to them. They're also conducting a full-scale independent audit of all their hardware, software, code, architecture and processes, building a committee of cybersecurity leaders and experts from around the world, not just to make their service stronger, but to also increase industry standards. And, perhaps most interestingly, they're introducing a bug bounty program where they basically challenge people to try to hack into their systems and expose vulnerabilities and pay them a bounty if they succeed. Again, it's important to stress that because Nord don't log what you do anyway, no user information was exposed, the service as a whole wasn't attacked, the code wasn't hacked, the VPN tunnel wasn't breached, and the NordVPN apps were unaffected. All of which is why I'm still completely happy to have Nord sponsoring this episode of Mingles with Jingles. Once again, for a limited time, you can get 70% off a 3-year subscription plan when you go to nordvpn.com/jingles, and if you use the code JINGLES in the checkout, you also get an extra month for free on top. This makes your subscription just $3.49 a month, so you can browse and shop securely online on all of your devices. Anyway, I hope you've all had a good weekend. I know I have. This has been a fantastic couple of weeks for gaming, whether you're playing on the PC, console, or both. There are just so many great new games out that I've just been struggling to find the time to play everything that needs to be played. I mean, I'm kind of glad that they haven't all come out on the same day. And not all of the great new games are actually new games. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 on the PC, for example, isn't exactly a new game. I had played it and completed it on PlayStation. But it's just as good, if not better, on PC. Of course, I understand that I have very definitely been one of the lucky ones when it comes to Red Dead 2 on the PC, because it pretty much just worked when I tried to play it. I got a crashed desktop once, within a couple of days of the game's release. And it definitely kind of seems that, at least as far as Red Dead 2 on the PC is concerned, I'm in the minority, because that's the only problem I had. Other than that, the game just works pretty much flawlessly. Other people have been getting stutters, screen freezes, crashes to desktop, or just not been able to get the game running at all. And there doesn't seem to be any one reason for it. Rockstar were very keen to point the finger at everybody's graphics drivers. And while you can't really rule that out, it smells like bullshit to me. I mean, I have an NVIDIA graphics card, and NVIDIA always release new drivers a day or two ahead of any brand new game's release, and Red Dead 2 for the PC was no exception. But I didn't install those graphics drivers, and the game worked fine for me. But I know other people who didn't install those graphics drivers, and the game didn't work fine for them. And I know other people who did install those graphics drivers, and the game didn't work fine for them. And then later, Death Stranding came out, and Jedi Fallen Order came out, and there were brand new graphics drivers for them as well, and I did install them, and guess what? Red Dead still worked fine for me. I know other people who had to disable their antivirus software in order to get the game to run. I didn't have to disable my antivirus software. The game just worked fine for me. My good friend, incompetent camera minion Eddie, has definitely been one of the more unlucky ones. He managed to get the game to run, but with significant screen freezes and stutters and then eventual crashes to desktop, and it didn't matter whether he did or didn't update his graphics drivers. It didn't matter whether he did or didn't disable his antivirus software. It didn't matter how he tweaked his game settings. It didn't matter whether he used Vulkan or DirectX for game rendering. He just couldn't get the game to run reliably. And it took several patches from Rockstar before that situation eventually fixed itself. Far too long after the launch of the game to be even remotely acceptable. You have to wonder how it could be possible for Rockstar to have fucked things up so dramatically. I mean, this isn't a new game. It's been around for a year. And I think that's part of the problem. Now, I've got no hard data regarding this, of course. This is pure speculation on my behalf, but it kind of makes sense and it kind of fits the facts that we know about. Well, actually, I've got two possible explanations, and the first one is that Rockstar just got complacent, because this isn't a new game. And as far as the game systems are concerned, they've pretty much worked all of the bugs out of it. And what I mean by that is that the game works. People have been playing it on PlayStation and Xbox for a year. Rockstar know, at this point, that the basic game logic, for example here, I'm about to threaten some money out of a Polish immigrant. I'm doing a data collection quest for Strauss. Back at Horseshoe. A debt. Sudden rush of shit to the brain there. Yeah. I'm doing a debt collection quest for Strauss back at Horseshoe Overlook. And so many millions of people by now on console have done this quest that if there were any problems with it, they were discovered up to a year ago and have long since been patched out. In that respect, I'm saying that the game works. They don't need to test this kind of thing. They know that all of the quests work in the way that they're supposed to. They know that all of the non-player characters are where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be. So in that respect, there's really no need for Rockstar to have done the kind of rigorous, intensive, and probably very expensive pre-launch testing that they would have had to do if this was a brand new, from the ground up PC release. And of course, this isn't the first time they've ported a game to the PC. There's, amongst other things, probably the most famous one being Grand Theft Auto 5. And I don't recall there being any significant issues with the PC port of Grand Theft Auto 5. I mean, let's not forget, Rockstar were originally a PC games developer. So they understand the PC. They've ported games to the PC before without any significant issue. They know that this game works as a game. So was there really any need for closed beta cycles, beta testing weekends, early access, all that sort of stuff, stress testing? They've been running Red Dead Online for the best part of a year now as well. They know that their servers can handle the strain. So was there really any need to do that kind of rigorous pre-launch testing? And I think they probably got a bit complacent. They thought to themselves, well, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We've done this before. We know the servers can handle it. We know the game works. It's quite literally just a straight port to the PC. And hey, we used to be PC games developers. We've done this before. We can do it in our sleep. And so they didn't subject the game to that kind of rigorous pre-launch testing. There were no closed beta weekends. There was no early access. There was none of that stuff. And when you don't do all of that stuff, what you're also doing is not exposing your game's code to the vast range of different permutations of hardware and software configurations that you can typically expect to see when you are developing a game for the PC. Now, a lot of that is probably on the developers of the hardware and the drivers, because you can't expect a game developer to be able to specifically code their software for that massive range of different possible potential configurations that it's going to have to deal with. And so the hardware and device driver developers are expected to ensure that their stuff complies with certain standards. And then the games developer just has to ensure that things from their end also comply with those standards. But you're always going to get things that slip through gaps. Things that you can't possibly predict unless you test. And that's without even taking into account the possibility of bugs, either from the game developer or from the device driver developers. And you're never going to find those bugs unless you stress test. And they didn't stress test. So is it any real surprise that the PC launch of Red Dead 2 was so dramatically bad? Okay, well, that's one potential explanation, Jingles, but you said there were two. I did, yes. The other possible explanation for why the first couple of weeks of Red Dead 2 on the PC was so shaky is possibly because Rockstar simply fucked up the port. I suspect that the truth is a combination to one degree or another of those two possible explanations. People have been saying it's the worst game launch ever. Well, I don't know about that. I think some of the video thumbnails have been a bit clickbaity where that's concerned. It certainly wasn't a good launch. It was a pretty bad launch, but I don't think it was the worst game launch ever. And yeah, it's taken a couple of weeks to fix most of the problems, but they have at least been fixed. Worst game launch ever? No, I don't think Fallout 76 has to worry about anybody claiming that title anytime soon. Relax, Todd Howard. It's all good. That's one particular accolade. I don't think anybody's going to be taken away from you in the foreseeable future. But Red Dead 2 on PC is just one of those games that I have absolutely been kicking the arse out of over the course of the last couple of weeks. And yeah, I know. I have played the game through to completion before. I did it on the PlayStation 4. Many of you watched the Red Dead 2 video series that I did, so the plot has been thoroughly spoiled for me by now, of course. And I don't care, because the game is so good. This is easily going to be in the top 5 games I have ever played on any system. Doesn't matter whether it's on PlayStation or PC. The game is fucking awesome. On PC, this has become the game that I play to just chill out and relax. There are other games that I can play if I want to be challenged and frustrated and throw my keyboard out of the window. And we'll come on to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order in a moment. But don't worry, not in a bad way before everybody starts ragging on me again for complaining all the time. But Red Dead 2 it's just the perfect chill out and relax game. And that's how I've been playing it on PC. I'm just riding around the world, chilling out, taking it easy. I'm not in any rush to see what happens next, because I know what happens next. I've already played the game on PlayStation. I'm just seeing stuff that I missed the first time around. I'm completing challenges. I'm hunting. I'm fishing. I'm becoming a bit of a poker expert. Okay, maybe I'm not going to go quite that far. But I'm certainly beating some of the gambling challenges. You know, there's just so much stuff to do that doesn't involve chasing the plot of the game. So that's what I'm doing, because it's fun. I'm just taking time to stop and smell the coffee and appreciate everything that's been put into this game properly. And that's what I feel makes it a perfect candidate for this Unplugged bonus video series that I've been doing. Although, I feel like a lot of people are missing the point of that, judging by the comments. I mean, I appreciate that one of the big reasons why people bother to watch my videos at all is certainly not for the gaming skills on display, it's for the commentary. And there's no commentary in the Unplugged videos, so yeah, okay, on that level, I get it. But if you want to see me doing, or listen to me doing, a commentary on Red Dead Redemption 2 gameplay, I've already covered that 43 times. I have 43 Red Dead 2 videos with commentary. So you're really not missing anything here. And I could understand that if I was putting these Unplugged videos up instead of videos with commentary, then you'd have a point and you'd have a perfect right to complain. Except I'm not. These are always bonus videos, in addition to whatever the regular daily scheduled content upload is with commentary, except for on Sundays, when I'm not supposed to be putting the video up anyway, and yet you're still getting anything up to an hour of bonus video content. No need to thank me, you're welcome. But Jingles, we don't want to watch your videos if there's no commentary. Well then don't fucking watch them. I mean, I really don't see what the problem is here. Go and watch the other video that I uploaded that day, the one that does have commentary. It's not like I'm trying to conceal the fact that these Unplugged videos are just raw gameplay footage with some editing. It's like people are walking down the high street and they see a shop that sells oranges. It's called the Orange Shop. Oranges are sold here. So they walk into the shop, they buy an orange, they eat the orange. Funnily enough, the orange tastes of oranges, and then they complain to the owner that it didn't taste of apples. You understand that this is a you problem, yeah? This is an orange shop. We sell oranges here. It's quite clearly labelled outside the door. If it's apples that you want, I also happen to have an apple shop, and funnily enough, it's also open today. It's just a little bit further down the road. You pays your money, or in fact, in this case, since the apples and oranges are all free, you don't pays your money, and yet you still feel like you have a right to complain. What a time to be alive. Here's a free bonus video. You might not like it because of reasons that we've discussed. Jingles, I don't like this. Yeah, we discussed this. I can't help but feel that perhaps you weren't really paying attention. Never mind. Whatever. The whole point of the Unplugged series, and I swear this is the last time I'm going to go over it. Well, in the case of Red Dead 2, there was so much footage that I recorded on the PlayStation that just ended up going into the bin because of editing constraints. And there's so much going on in Red Dead 2 that there's just no way I would ever be able to show it all with commentary. I mean, these Unplugged videos are routinely anything up to an hour long. If I had to provide commentary for an hour, you've got no idea how long it takes. It seems like I just make it all up as I go along. I really don't. I don't have a script or anything. I do kind of make it up as I go along. But there's so much editing involved and re-recording of the commentary. There's no way I could provide commentary for an hour of gameplay, in addition to the 15 to 20 minutes of whatever it is that I'm doing on that same day that also has commentary. And the point of the Unplugged series is to just sit back and enjoy. Without having to concentrate, without having to be coached on what it is that you're watching. And I appreciate that people, probably most of you, aren't really going to enjoy that. And if that is the case, I completely understand. exercise your democratic right to not watch it. But some of you will. In fact, some of you do. And these are low maintenance videos for me to produce. It's why I'm able to. There's a minimal amount of editing involved. I don't just want you to be watching Arthur riding around the hills of Montana or whatever for an hour. That would be pretty boring. So there's some editing that goes into them. But essentially what you're looking at is background music for YouTube. That's kind of what these videos are. Something to have maybe on a second monitor while you're busy doing something else on your main monitor. Like having a TV show playing in the background or some music playing while you're doing something else. And if people want to just watch the whole thing, knock yourself out. I do a certain amount of editing so that you're not just watching Arthur riding around in a horse for an hour. There is actually stuff going on, but it's more about just enjoying the beauty of what it is that the game has to offer. Again, if that's not your thing, feel free to not watch. It may surprise you to hear that I have been continuing to play Death Stranding. Well, it might not come as such a surprise because I did push out a second Unplugged video on the game yesterday, but I have been, pun not intended, plugging away at Death Stranding. Quite a lot, actually. I've been probably putting more time into Death Stranding, certainly over the last week, well, because it's only been out a week, so obviously, but more than Red Dead 2 on PC. I stand by what I said in my review of the game, however. It is a game that I think the majority of people are going to find frustrating as all hell to play, probably for at least anything between the first 5 and 10 hours, and I've been seeing comments that have been reinforcing that opinion. One person said they made it 8 hours into the game, it didn't get any better, and they just gave up. That's a shame, because it does get, I want to say it gets better, and yet there are people who've been enjoying it from the first minute. I suspect that they're in the minority, however, based on what I've been reading and the comments that I've been seeing, not just on my Death Stranding videos, but on other people's Death Stranding videos and various different blogs and reviews. It's not that people don't get the game. I know that all of the die-hard Kojima fanboys are going to be claiming that that's what the problem is, and I suspect a lot of people are not getting it. But I think that's misjudging a lot of the people who are playing the game, or trying to play the game. I think a lot of people are getting it, they just don't fucking like it. Also, I think it's important to recognise that that kind of misunderstanding works both ways as well, because Hideo Kojima, the creator of the game, has been described as a pretentious twat and a visionary genius. And I think there's probably an element of truth in both descriptions. He does have a definite and pretty clear vision for what the game is supposed to be. And I know for a fact that a lot of people either don't get it, or they do get it and they just don't like it. And those are both perfectly valid reactions to the game. You're not required to like everything that you play, in the same way that you're not required to like everything that you watch on YouTube. I think it's pretty clear, however, that the number of people that do get it, they do understand it right from the start, and they do like it right from the start, are probably in the minority. What I'm pretty sure is happening with the game, for the majority of the people who are having a go at it, and this pretty much is exactly what I said in my initial review, is that this game would almost certainly have had a much bigger audience than it's currently enjoying if it just wasn't so tedious for the first 5 to 10 hours. I'm pretty sure that even the people that don't get it, that don't really understand what Kojima is going on about, if they could just make it through that initial 5 to 10 hour period, because it does start to make sense, even if you don't get it right from the start. If you can plug away at it long enough, everything does actually start to make a certain amount of sense. All of the weird stuff, the typical Kojima stuff. I mean, the time fall, for example, the rain that's laced with the chiral crystals, that suddenly and mysteriously, once it hits the ground, turns to normal water, but while it's falling, causes everything that it comes into contact with to age, which is why there are no roads, because the roads just erode over the course of days or weeks. There are roads in the game. You're certainly not going to be seeing any of them for the first couple of hours, aside from the ones in the cities and at the various different stations that you're delivering packages between. But you can build highways. They require a lot of resources, and usually some cooperation between yourself and the other players. Actually, more on that in a moment, because of the cooperative aspect of the game. Even though you never actually see any of the other players, you can cooperate with them. Actually, no, we may as well discuss that now, because it is one of the game's more innovative features, and something that I don't really see many people talking about. It's very much a single-player game, but with online aspects. And as you're travelling around the world, well, for example, right up ahead there you can see a sign. That sign hasn't been placed by me, that's been placed by another player. What the game does is things that you build have a chance of being incorporated into other players' game worlds. And if it's something useful, you can give them likes. And the amount of likes that you get as a porter, as a courier, helps directly with your status as a courier and opens up new options for you. So there's a very strong incentive for you to create things, place watchtowers and bridges and restrooms and things in the world, not just because they're going to help you, but also because, if they're valuable enough, if they're useful enough, there's an excellent chance that they will appear in the game worlds of other people playing the game. And they can also deposit resources to maintain them so that they don't just erode whenever it rains and the timefall hits them. This sign up here, for example, dropped by another player, even gives you the player's name. And you've got the opportunity to hit the like button, and that will help them out. Now, a lot of these holographic signs that people have dropped are really just there for encouragement, for example. But some of them actually have clear defined purposes. For example, if you're crossing an area that's infested with BTs, you can drop a danger BTs ahead sign, and there's a very good chance that that's going to appear in everybody else's game world, warning people to be ready because there are bad guys up ahead. You can drop signs. Maybe, for example, it'd be a good idea to have a timefall shelter in a certain area where there's particularly heavy timefall. You don't have the resources for it yourself, but you can drop a holo sign requesting that a timefall shelter be built at that spot, and that holo sign can appear in other people's worlds, and if they have the resources, they can build the timefall shelter for you. So, despite the fact that it is very much a single-player game, there are some extremely innovative multiplayer aspects to it. But of course, the problem, as ever, is that it's such a ball ache to play for the first 5 to 10 hours. Most people are probably never going to appreciate what it is exactly that this game does have to offer. Because it does get better. The tedious nature of walking or running across these desolate landscapes. I mean, I quite like the landscapes. I think they're absolutely beautiful. What they've done with the Decima game engine is just jaw-droppingly amazing. This is the same game engine that was used in Horizon Zero Dawn, by the way. And I'm not saying that Horizon Zero Dawn wasn't an astonishingly pretty game, but it didn't look anything like this. But the tedium of wandering across these landscapes, regardless of how pretty you do or don't think they are, while fighting your controller to stay upright, is the game's biggest problem. Not the batshit crazy plot, not the fact that most of it doesn't make an awful lot of sense until you've played for long enough. It's just getting over the fact that what you're really doing is delivering packages. And you're fighting the controller to stay upright. Now, later on, much, much later on, far too later on, in my opinion, things get better. You unlock new equipment, exoskeletons, for example, that you can use to not only improve your balance, but also to carry much, much heavier loads. power gloves for gripping onto surfaces. The problem, of course, is that you don't get any of this stuff until way past the point where most people are probably just going to have given up. You're going to be doing this for hours and hours and hours, way past the point of no return for most people. And to be completely fair, I even kind of understand why there is so much of this in the early stages of the game, because they are trickle feeding you new stuff while this is going on, while you're making all of the initial deliveries the hard way. You are still being fed new things. They're just not completely useful new things. They're not new things that make it easier to do this. Things that make it easier, faster, or less of a ball ache to just walk from one delivery point to the next. But the payoff is there. It just takes far longer than it should to actually get that payoff. Way past the point of no return for most people. I mean, you get access to vehicles relatively early on. It's just that the terrain isn't entirely suitable for using them. And then, of course, if you take part in one of the highway construction projects, well, suddenly you do have the terrain that's entirely suitable for using the vehicles. And it was when I constructed my first highway that I think I really started to enjoy playing the game. Of course, I was about 6 hours in at that point. So there's that. But sooner or later, well, let's be honest here, much, much later, the tedious aspect of the game, the gameplay loop of picking up packages from one point and delivering them to another point, all while doing your level best to avoid falling on your face, becomes a lot less tedious. And the game stops becoming an abstract experience in what it's like to have one of Hideo Kojima's fever dreams, and it becomes an actual game. Of course, the issue, as always, is that it just takes far too long for most people to get to that point. You either need the patience of a saint, or you need to be able to put yourself into the mindset of not trying to think of Death Stranding as a game. To think of it more as a sort of ambient experience, like background music. But background music that you're having at least a minimal amount of interaction with. To just switch off and go with it. And that's one of the reasons why I think that Death Stranding in particular, even more than Red Dead Redemption 2, is a perfect candidate for an Unplugged series. And of course it's also one of the biggest problems with the game, because certainly for the first, I keep coming up with the numbers 5 to 10 hours, but for the first 5 to 10 hours it's probably a lot more relaxing and entertaining to watch than it is to play. After that point, however, you do have all kinds of cool shit waiting for you. I mean, not just the vehicles and the road construction, but the zip lines. Oh my god, the zip lines. In fact, full disclosure here, I was ready to give up. This game had broken me. And then one night last week, I was watching somebody streaming Death Stranding. And they'd made it into the mountains, and they were starting to use the zip lines. And the zip lines alone gave me the incentive to carry on playing. What are the zip lines, Jingles? Holy shit, wait until you see the zip lines. The zip lines are a feature that do require a fair amount of preparation. In order to place the zip line anchor points, you're going to be doing a lot of mountain climbing, because you need clear line of sight from one zip line to another in order for them to have any point whatsoever. But bear in mind, talking about the cooperative aspects of the game, once you've got an area on the chiral network, you can see all of the other constructions that other players have made. And some of them may have already placed zipline anchor points, so sometimes, at the very least, all you really have to do is extend their existing network. But once you've done that, you get to do shit like this. Now, it took me a while to get to this stage. I pretty much had to climb over an entire mountain range, setting up these zipline anchor points, but I didn't have to do the last two because some other player had already put them there. It took me about an hour and a half's work to set this transport network up. And that's about how long it would take to do a normal delivery on this route. I had to do it the hard way the first time, but only the first time. Through snowstorms, well, timefall snowstorms, so, you know, my cargo was decaying all the time while I was doing it. Through snowdrifts, really rough terrain. I mean, we're in the middle of the mountains, areas infested with BTs. The first delivery, while setting up the zip lines, took about an hour and a half. If it hadn't been for the fact that some other player, and you saw me giving his zipline anchor point some lights there, if some other player hadn't set up the last two anchor points, it would have probably taken 2 hours. Every subsequent delivery, however, takes less than a minute. Suddenly, 15 hours into the game, it feels like I'm actually playing a game, rather than just experiencing one of Hideo Kojima's cheese and alcohol-fueled fever dreams. There is a game buried very, very deep within Death Stranding. It's just a shame that most people, for completely understandable reasons, are probably just not going to have the patience to see it. Which, again, is why I firmly believe that this game is absolutely perfect for an Unplugged series, and why I'm going to continue putting this game up as an Unplugged series. And I am glad, even though I came so close on multiple occasions to just throwing the controller against the wall and packing it in disgust, I am glad that I continued to stick it out. I wish I could remember the name of the Twitch streamer that I was watching who was doing this right at the point where I was ready to give up, and gave me the incentive to keep playing the game. But I still think 15 hours of gameplay is a little bit too much to expect most people to endure before they can get to this point. Against all the odds, I did stick with it, and I'm glad that I did, because it has turned into an enjoyable experience. And yet still probably not the kind of experience that a lot of people are going to be happy with, thanks to the nature of the gameplay. You are still just delivering packages from one location to another, while trying to make sense of Hideo Kojima's world and storyline. And that's still probably going to be a turn-off for a fair amount of people out there. The game is what it is. I'm glad I stuck with it. Your mileage may vary. All of which, I suppose, brings me on to the other thing that I've been spending far too much time on lately. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. The first Star Wars game that Electronic Arts have published that doesn't completely suck. I realise, of course, that's not saying much. Electronic Arts haven't exactly set the bar particularly high on that score. But regardless of whether or not you like the game, understand the game, or are any good at the game, in my case, the fact remains that Respawn Entertainment have delivered a Star Wars game that isn't completely shit, and does a whole bunch of things remarkably well. You could probably best describe Fallen Order as a sort of Dark Souls meets Uncharted, but with lightsabers. The fact that the protagonist of the game, Cal, only ever uses a lightsaber is kind of frustrating. There are certain points in the game where having a blaster would really have helped, but, you know, it is what it is. And of course, I'd never played the Dark Souls games. They kind of scared me off, based on their reputation for brutal difficulty alone. So a lot of the game mechanics in Fallen Order kind of took me by surprise. I mean, I had a vague idea that I wasn't seeing anything particularly innovative, because the developers had talked about how much they had been inspired by Dark Souls. So I kind of suspected that I was seeing a lot of things that were borrowed from that game, even if I had never played it myself. But holy shit, this game's hard. I don't think I'll be doing an Unplugged series on this game because the amount of editing that I would have to do to remove all of my fuck-ups. You know, those moments where I try to make a jump and get it wrong over and over and over and over. You think I'm exaggerating? I'm not. And that is one of the issues that I have with the game. Because I say it's a sort of cross between Dark Souls with lightsabers and Uncharted. It is and it isn't. I mean, at its heart, it's a third-person perspective action platform game. But it's not quite as precise. The running, jumping, climbing side of it, it's not... I struggled for a way to describe it in my review of the game. I think the term I came up with was context sensitive. For example, if you're in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Uncharted, you know, whatever, other games of this type, and you want to make a jump from one environmental anchor to another, you know that it's always going to work if you're on the start point and moving the controller, whether that be, you know, joypad or keyboard, in the direction of the jump point. The game reads your intentions. It says, okay, you're at the right point, you're looking in the right direction, you just press the right button. You will always make that jump. You don't get that in this game. There is an element of aim involved, and it can very easily just go wrong if you're the slightest bit off. I get why they've done that, because you do get a far, far greater degree of control if you're any good. It's kind of like the difference between flying a BF-109 and flying a Spitfire. Everybody who's ever flown a Spitfire says that they're an absolute joy to fly. The BF-109 was a very popular fighter aircraft, but it could be a difficult fighter aircraft to fly. The thing is, the BF-109, or rather the pilot of the BF-109, had a whole bunch of instruments and controls available to him that just weren't in the cockpit of a Spitfire. So a Spitfire pilot had less to worry about when he was flying the aircraft. But it also meant that he didn't quite have as much fine control over the aircraft's systems as a very good BF-109 pilot would be capable of achieving. An average pilot in a Spitfire wasn't really that much worse than an extremely good pilot in a Spitfire. An extremely good Spitfire pilot couldn't really get that much more performance out of the machine than an average pilot, but an extremely good pilot in the BF-109 had a far greater range of options for controlling the aircraft and squeezing the last bit of performance out of it than an equivalent pilot in the Spitfire. Uncharted is a Spitfire. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is very much a BF-109. And unfortunately, I'm just not that good a pilot. Yes, Jingles, we know. We've seen you playing War Thunder. There's a reason why the phrase Jingles landing has entered into the common lexicon. Yes, all right. I have been enjoying playing this game. I acknowledge that I'm not very good at it. And some of my issues with this game, I accept that it's because I'm not very good at it and just not very good at third-person action games in general. And yet, when I did my review of this on Saturday, a number of people in the comments were saying, Jingles, it's just because you're crap. Well, I know I'm crap, but it's not just because I'm crap. I mean, yeah, a large part of it is, but some of the issues that I had with the combat, it's not just me. Yeah, okay, a lot of the time it is, because I am quite ham-fisted with the controls, but not all of the time. And the specific example that I'm thinking of here is that a lot of the bosses, well, all of the bosses, and most of the stronger enemies, have an unblockable attack, something that you can only dodge, and they telegraph they're about to do this attack by turning red. That's your cue to hammer the dodge button, or just run and get out of the way. The problem here, which really pisses me off and frustrates me when I'm playing the game, is that all too often it's impossible to avoid. It's happened enough times to really piss me off that I've just hit the button to execute a strong attack, Right, the enemy is not displaying any indication that they're about to do something that I have to get out of the way of. So I go for the strong attack, and then right after I go for the strong attack, as I'm beginning the strong attack animation, the enemy turns red, indicating that they're about to do something that if I don't get out of the way of is really going to hurt. They commit to that after I've already committed. So my strong attack does 0 damage, and then I get steamrollered by their own unblockable attack. You can't predict it, you can't interrupt it, and you can't avoid it. And you don't even get the consolation prize of having done some damage to them with your own strong attack in the meantime. It's intensely annoying. I mean, if you make a mistake, you should get punished for it. And I don't have a problem with that. And this is a tough game, and you are going to make lots of mistakes, and you are going to get punished for it. And it took some time before I accepted that dying in this game is all part of the process. But when you don't make a mistake and you do get punished for it, I mean, you know, it is a hard game. It's hard enough without being punished for not making mistakes. I still think it's an extremely good game, despite recognising that it's not going to be to everybody's tastes, although it's definitely much more mass market than something like Death Stranding. But, I mean, look at this. Look at me desperately fumbling, just trying to grab onto an extremely easy handhold. I'm not going to be doing a video playthrough of Fallen Order. I'm not going to be doing an Unplugged series of Fallen Order, because it must be just frustrating in the extreme watching somebody as ham-fisted as me sort of fumbling their way through it. I mean, I've put videos up where I've been playing other games. Assassin's Creed Odyssey as an example, and Uncharted, where people were saying, holy shit, Jingles. And I hadn't actually been doing that badly, but because I'm not playing like a super unicum, you're seeing comments saying, holy shit, Jingles, it was painful watching you fumble your way through that. Guys, if you thought watching me playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Uncharted was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. And again, I get it, because I've found myself watching people playing other things on Twitch, and I've been thinking to myself, holy shit, it's right there, click on it, for God's sake, are you blind? So I understand the frustration, and for that exact reason, you're not going to be seeing any more of this game, except maybe in Mingles with Jingles as background footage, but I'm certainly not going to be doing a video series on it, and it's definitely not really a suitable candidate for an Unplugged series either. This is a game that if it's going to be enjoyable to watch, you need to be watching somebody who's actually pretty good. Which straight away rules me out. I have been watching other people play it, by the way. In fact, just this afternoon. I can't remember who it was. It was an American on Twitch. It was very entertaining to watch. And I didn't realise at the time I started watching, but it was actually very, very close to finishing the game. He was playing it on Grandmaster difficulty, which is as hard as it gets, and he was very good, because he wasn't, you know, dying every 2 minutes. Which is why I am playing it on story mode difficulty, so I can fuck it up. And not pay too much of a penalty for it. But when I was watching, I didn't realise that it was actually very, very close to completing the game. Now, no spoilers. There are certain elements of the story, even as far through as I've gotten, where I've been thinking to myself, yep, this is going to happen, yep, that's going to happen. And it wasn't really that they were telegraphing these plot points. I just kind of guessed. I thought, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is going to happen. And wasn't too surprised when I turned out to be right. But the final boss fight in this game, holy fuck. I'm not going to spoil it. And if you are thinking of playing this, try to avoid spoilers if at all possible, because fuck me, that last boss fight, wow. I saw it happen on Twitch this afternoon. I was probably just as surprised as the guy. I think it was Fextra Life, actually, who was playing through it. Although I could be wrong, but he shit himself when the boss fight happened. I shit myself when the boss fight happened. But not nearly as much as I'm shitting myself at the idea of having to actually do it myself. Suffice to say, It's going to be anything but boring, and definitely worth the price of entry to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I think all of its own. Anyway, good game, very challenging, which just makes it more satisfying when you beat it, I suppose. Actually, speaking of my ham-fistedness when it comes to controlling, well, games in general, and PlayStation games in particular, I watched a video on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, and I keep meaning to talk about it in Mingles with Jingles, but I keep forgetting, but I've remembered this week. Unfortunately, I did have the video bookmarked, but apparently not anymore, which is, a bit of a shame, because I'd like to put a link in the video description to it. Basically, some guy sat his non-gaming girlfriend down in front of the PC and the PlayStation, and then recorded her playing. Now, I don't know if your experience has been the same as mine. I suspect it probably has when you're sitting somebody down in front of a game or a gaming system that they're not familiar with, because you think they might enjoy it and you'd like to encourage them to play it. And then they start playing, and you go out of your mind with frustration. A lot like watching one of my videos. Just out of your mind with frustration because they're just not getting basic concepts, things that you completely take for granted as a gamer. And it's kind of been like that, really, with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I made a, turns out, quite foolish remark in my review that why on earth did they put the main attack button on the square button? I mean, what's wrong with the right trigger like every other PlayStation game? Well, not like every other PlayStation game, actually, Jingles. Like every other PlayStation shooter, because that's really all I've played on the PlayStation. But I hadn't really played any beat-em-ups, and that's perfectly normal in a beat-em-up. But I didn't know, because I was unfamiliar with that kind of game, at least on the PlayStation. It's like when you sit down in front of a first-person shooter on the PC. You know that you control your aim with the mouse. You know that you fire with the left mouse button. You probably aim with the right mouse button. You know that WASD controls your movement. You know that space probably jumps and control probably crouches.
This needs power.
A lot of these games come with tutorials, but you don't need the tutorial because you know how first-person shooters work on PCs. And it's not just first-person shooters. Mostly regardless of the genre of game that you're playing, anything that involves any kind of combat on the PC, generally speaking, left mouse button is going to be attack. WASD is pretty much always going to control your movement. Nobody needs to tell you this. It's just the way things are. It's what you're used to. And in fact, you tend to get quite upset when you get a new game and things don't work the way that you expect them to. It's kind of like loot color coding in RPGs. Pretty much everybody follows the standard that World of Warcraft set, purely because, why reinvent the wheel? In increasing order of value, if you're playing a role-playing game and there's a loot drop, it's either going to be white, green, blue, purple, or orange, with white being junk and orange being amazing. There are some variations. For example, Star Trek Online goes in increasing order of value: white, green, blue, purple, yellow. There are some other variations between various different games, mostly at the top end of the value spectrum. There's gold loot in certain other games, but generally speaking, the whole white, green, blue, purple thing is pretty much the de facto standard. But there's always got to be a hipster, isn't there? I must have been playing Guild Wars 2 for 6 months before I realised that in Guild Wars 2 it's not... I mean, they've got white, green, blue and purple gear, but that's not the order of value. No, in Guild Wars 2, for reasons known only to themselves, it's white, blue, green and then purple. So for months I'd been throwing away and selling all the good stuff and using all of the shit. So, thanks Guild Wars 2. I mean, I think Guild Wars 2 is an amazing game, but seriously, you just had to be the hipster on the block, didn't you? But it's things like that that can really piss people off if games don't conform to the standards that they expect. And if you're watching somebody who's never played a game before, you sit them down in front of Call of Duty on the PC, for example. They've never played a first-person shooter on there. They've never played a game of any description on the PC before. And you watch them bumping into walls and, and just getting stuck and not having the most basic idea of what to do. Because they're trying to do things that seem logical to them based on being a human being in the real world. But that doesn't necessarily translate very well into a PC first-person shooter. We're fine, because we know how first-person shooters work. We don't need to be told. In fact, we quite resent having to go through the tutorial levels most of the time, because for God's sake, can we get on with it? I want to play the game. But somebody who's never played a game of any description on a PC before, or a PlayStation, or whatever, it can be intensely frustrating watching them. But there's a lot we can learn from watching them as well. Like watching somebody play a simple platform game. And I mean a really simple platform game. Something like the original Super Mario World, for example. Not something as complex and challenging as Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. A really basic 2D side-scrolling platform game. It doesn't take them long before they get the basic concepts, like, you know, left and right to move. Whatever button happens to be jump, whether that's space on a PC keyboard or X on a controller, whatever. You know, they get the basics pretty quickly. I mean, you know, depending on how basic the platformer is, there may only be 3 controls. So that's not an issue. But then they start asking questions. Questions that we would never even consider asking. They'll say things like, why can't I grab onto that? Well, because that's not a grab point. Well, but I could grab onto that. Well, yeah, that is a grab point. So why isn't that a grab point? What would be the point of grabbing onto that? Well, I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that I can grab onto one part, but I can't grab onto the other part. I mean, I still have the same hands. but that's not how games work. Because that's the answer. It's the only answer we have. It doesn't make any sense. But it's the only answer we have. It works like that because reasons. But this is how we've been conditioned to react. And it can be hilarious watching somebody who hasn't undergone that kind of conditioning play a game. Because they don't have those preconceptions. They're actually, it looks like they're doing incredibly stupid things, but they're actually approaching it completely logically. And getting frustrated that it doesn't make sense. I mean, think about it from their point of view. Put yourself into their position. Imagine you have never played a PC or a PlayStation or an Xbox or whatever game before. And you're sitting down, let's use Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order as an example. You're sitting down in front of your PC or your PlayStation. Is it even available on the Xbox? Whatever. Doesn't matter. Whatever the gaming system is, you've never played a game of any description on whatever that system is before. So you get through the initial, fucking hell, how is this supposed to work phase, until you become reasonably familiar with the controls. And then you start asking the hard questions. Why can't I grab onto that? Why can't you grab onto what? That pipe. Which pipe? That one, right there. It's within reach. Yeah, but it's not a climbing point. But why isn't it a climbing point? I mean, it's right underneath where I need to be. And it's a pretty bloody obvious handhold. I mean, I could climb that. Never mind the character I'm controlling. I, in real life, could climb that. So why can't I do it in the game? Well, because you're supposed to continue going down this corridor and then open a door and then turn left and then find a climbing point and climb up into a hatch which leads you through a crawl space which drops you down into that place where you want to be. Yeah, but that's fucking stupid. I mean, it's right there. There's a pipe which I can hold on to. It's not just me, is it? Sadly, I'm afraid it is just them. Because the best reason we can come up with for why you can't do something that seems bloody obvious is because that's just not how games work. Oh, hang on a second. I have a lightsaber. Why don't I just cut the door open? You can't do that. Why not? I saw them doing it in Star Wars. This is a Star Wars game, isn't it? Well, yeah, but That's just not how this game works. Well, that's a stupid fucking answer. And they're not wrong. But unfortunately, that's not how this game in particular, or games in general, work, is the best answer that we have. Anyway, I think I've spent more than enough time blabbering on in this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. You're getting a bumper episode this week, aren't you? It's now over an hour. Holy shit. Well, that's what happens when I get my teeth into a topic that I just find interesting to talk about. It's difficult to shut me up. And it's been a fun episode for me to do. I really enjoyed recording it. Although I have no doubt that there will still be somebody in the comments complaining that the first 5 minutes were nothing but an advert. Well, yeah, but the following 55 minutes weren't, and it wasn't the first 5 minutes. There was 2 minutes of advert and 3 minutes of me recounting a story from my days in the Navy, which is apparently something I'm only allowed to do as long as I'm not actually making a living while I'm doing it. But, nah, what can you do? The world's full of people who are going to find something to bitch about. You can't let it dictate your content. And on that note, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as I've enjoyed recording it. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.